Captain Whitehall, Company D, 2nd United States Sharpshooters. Today's video, we're actually going to start the construction of the body of the Schuylkill Arsenal fatigue blouse that we have for Private White. The first step in constructing the body is the collar. It's actually on the very first page of the instruction booklet that is supplied by Wambaugh and Company. So to construct the collar, you have three sets of pieces. You have your interfacing portion of the collar, you have your under collar, and your over collar. Yes, these all look the same. The interfacing is kind of a thick cotton material. The under collar is actually slightly more narrow than the over collar. And for reasons for that, you will find out when we get further into the construction process of the collar for the Schuylkill Arsenal fatigue blouse. So to start, we're actually going to be taking the under collar, taking one piece of our interfacing, placing the under collar almost perfectly on top, as perfect as we can get it, and then taking your second piece and basically making an under collar sandwich, so to speak. So it should look like cotton, wool, wool, cotton. And if you look at the picture, yes, the interfacing on this is a white cotton material, but it's exactly the same concept. So from there, you will want to use a 3/8 inch seam. If a seam allowance is not given on the coat, you can pretty much guarantee that they're going to be talking about a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And just like every other seam that we have so far done on this coat, we're going to even everything up, make sure it's nice and flush with each other. Take our gauge, pull it down to 3/8 of an inch. With this one, it's a relatively straight piece, so this will be very easy to do. You just mark here, and we make a mark here. And then from there, you just draw lines right across. And then with the over collar, you will do the exact same thing. If you hear doors opening and closing in the background, my roommates just got back from the grocery store, so you'll hear all sorts of voices and banging around in the background, so hopefully that doesn't come through too loudly on the mic. And that's pretty much it for prep of the collar. We just now have to pin and then get the sewing done on the seams. And with that, I'm just gonna fast forward through this and you'll see the end finished product of what it should look like here in just 1 second. All right, now that we have our collar pieces done, they are sewn with a tight back stitch at 3/8 of an inch. The next step we're gonna have to do is to press the seams open. So again, we're gonna use our ironing board. I'm just gonna use the sleeve board for ease of use in this case. We're going to lay it open, obviously with the seam facing us. We're going to take our iron, press that seam open, nice and flat. We're going to take our next one, make sure that the outer collar pieces, well, the inner collar, I should say, but the wool pieces of the collar are facing outward. And again, we're just going to press by some decent pressure, make sure all that stays nice and flat. And just like that, we have 2 pressed collar pieces. So from here in our instructions, we are going to sew the under collar assembly in place. And as you can tell from the pictures, there's this little wavy pattern, and it's ideally supposed to be identical to each side. And I do have a slight trick for that. So I'm going to take a mechanical pencil, start from the center, and then kind of just do this wavy sort of pattern. And I know for a fact this is not going to show up on the camera. You're just going to have to trust me in the fact that this is existing. Notice how I'm only doing one side because we're going to use our chalk marker. And off that design that we just made, helps too if you pull this flat, this does like to flex. Of course I am doing it on a cutting board, so that, or an ironing board, so that's probably not helping my case any. And we're just going to follow that pattern that we drew. The one thing too about the Schuylkill Arsenal coats is, as I've been saying all through the videos so far, is these were done by people at home. So you can really add your own flair to this design. I've seen zigzag patterns going like this, up and down. Personally, I like this wavy pattern. It's kind of a little test of skill for me, at least. This kind of makes things a little more interesting. And it's one of those little details that's really not seen, but if it is, it's a really cool detail. And you kind of get to show off, which is always fun. So make sure that transfers over there. And I'm going over this a couple times, and you will see exactly why here in just a second. Okay, so now that that is marked, we're gonna want to make sure that our materials stay in place. So we're just gonna pop a pin through this side, right here, and we're going to pop a pin through this side. You will get a little bit of overhang, which is fine. All you need to do is just take your scissors, make sure that you very carefully don't cut your under collar. You just cut the facing off, and it's nice and flush. This side's fine, there's nothing to worry about. It just happens through the sewing process. Things kind of shift around. Okay, so now that we have this chalk line of ours, and it's gone over twice, so it's packing a lot of this chalk. You ask, well, why would you pack all this chalk on one side but not on the other? Well, since it's supposed to be a mirror image, simply it's on there. Fold this over. Run your hand over it a couple times, make sure it, you just want to go over it again, make sure that it's nice and crisp. And you're probably wondering, Captain Whitehall, why in the world would they do this? Well, this would actually keep the inner facing sewn to the body. You would actually see this done a lot on uniform coats or the frock coat with the padding and lining in the chest. You'd have all these varying lines going every which way, forming certain patterns. There was a excellent private purchase fatigue blouse that Dan Wambaugh and Brian White did. was posted on their website for a while. That was a sharpshooter officer's private purchase blouse, and it had a lining in it that was stitched to look like the lozenge of the third corps with red stitching, which looked absolutely fantastic. Alright, so just like that, we have these nice heavy lines that are pretty much mirror images, and it'll show through this other side because we'll actually be sewing through our material all the way through. So we're going to be using a tight running stitch, so it's just the go through, go under, or on top, go under, on top, go under, on top, go under. It's not a back stitch, anything like that. And it's just going to secure the interfacing to the under collar. So I'm going to get this all sewn up and we'll be back in just a second. Alright, and now that we have our inner sleeve done with this really cool wavy pattern, we're going to continue on the next step of the collar construction process. And what that entails is lining up the center seams of our over collar and under collar, pinning everything in place, putting in a 1/4 inch seam around the entire outline, starting 3/8 of an inch up from the bottom. So to do that, you're going to take the right sides. Remember, this is the right side. It's the side that's going to be facing outward or exposed to the visual of everyone looking at it. And we're going to take the right side of our over collar and simply match up the top. When matching up the top, you're going to have this overhang underneath the bottom side of it. And that's fine. That's actually going to be needed because that's what's going to be used later on in the construction of the rest of the coat and adding everything together. So what I typically do when sewing one of these is I always start with the wrong side of the over collar, just so I don't have all this other stuff in the way and things kind of distract me, like the wavy pattern. If you sew and have ADD, it's can be a little bit of a detriment, but typically should be just fine with that. So match up our collar, and just like that. I do have a little bit of an overhang that I'll have to trim off here and there, but it shouldn't be too big of an issue. So I'm going to get this all pinned up to show you what it looks like before we start sewing. So just 1 second. So now that our collar assembly is completely done, everything is pinned in place, marked with a starting of our seam 3/8 of an inch up from the bottom, with a 1/4 inch seam all the way around, except for the very bottom portion. And make sure when you are marking these that you leave this little square. So you kind of square off your corners here. There's a very good reason for this. After I get this all sewn up and everything, I'll show you the reason for that. It is a very key part, really, in doing this. One thing that I find when you're pinning the collar in place, the over collar and under collar, is make sure that you do 2 on each side of your seam that is pressed open. This definitely does like to move. This has risen up on me just a little bit, but it's nothing that we can't handle or pull things in and out of place, things like that. So I'm going to get this sewn up real fast, and we'll be back here in just a second to show you what to do with these clip corners and your collar assembly once it's all sewn. Okay, and now we're back. Apologize for kind of the weird little glow or haze that is coming through on the camera. We have a pretty big some pretty big forest fires burning here in Washington State at the time, and we just got completely socked in with smoke. So unfortunately, any natural light is kind of causing this weird little haze. So please forgive me for that. It's something I really can't control. But anyways, we have our collar assembly completely done, back stitched with a 1/4 inch seam, starting 3/8 of an inch up from the overseam, just like this, and some very nice tight back stitching. Obviously, this is the collar. It's gonna have some forces exerted on it, whether you're being pulled up by your shirt collar to get back up on line, being thrown over your shoulder while carrying a bunch of gear. There's plenty of reasons that could cause stress on it. As I was talking about before with prepping this, that haze is really bad. We have these little corners marked on our coats. Let's get this moved over here. This might help us out a little more. It's slightly better. So you can barely see just because of the rubbing from working on the coat itself. It kind of rubbed off, but we're actually going to clip these little corners, and it's just gonna be like what we did for the cuff facings. This is gonna be turned inside out, and when that happens, if you have these kind of big blocky corners, it's gonna prevent a nice sharp crisp 90-degree angles for the collar. Also helps if I kind of keep my hands on what I'm working on here. We just clip and we clip. And after this will look just like a Schuylkill Arsenal fatigue blouse collar. Just gotta take care of that one little bit of fibers holding that together. And as I was saying, when talking about prepping for this, you really want to be careful how close you're going to be cutting, because your seams or your stitching is actually going to meet right here in this corner. In fact, I cut that just close enough. So as you can see, you just want to be mindful and be very careful of where you cut. Once you have your corners cut, it's pretty simple. You just take this. I like to push it out from the corner. That way I get that nice, hard, crisp line. And also, if you hear laughing and shouting and all that in the background, one of my roommates is actually playing some video games right now and isn't having the best of luck at it. So, if you hear any of that, I apologize beforehand. He's a little too into video games, just like some people normally do. From here, you can actually press this down to make it lie flat. You will have the seam. Eventually you are going to want to press it. I prefer to press it before it is on the coat, because it also will be top stitched. To just add some nice features to it and everything like that right along here, kind of like what we did with the cuffs on the sleeves. But anyways, there you have it, a completed collar. So from here, the next step is actually going to be assembling the full body. Now the body comes in 4 pieces. You have the 2 back pieces and the 2 front pieces, and the easiest way to spot those is your back pieces are fairly narrow. And this is, let's see here, let's get my sewing gauge on this. Almost right at or almost 10 inches wide. You're going to have just 2 very simple kind of half moon shapes cut out of it. And this is just for the shoulder seam, where this is called the arm sky or arm side, where your sleeve would be attached, and part of the neck hole for the collar. So this is the piece we want, but I'm going to set this aside just so everyone can differentiate the different pieces for the coat. So this is the front. As you can tell, it is a lot wider. You know, a good almost, let's see, we got 8. Yeah, a good 16 inches wide, along with a much larger arm side, the shoulder, and a larger neck hole Obviously, this is going to be the front of the coat, plus it actually does have the rounded front edge that will be the front of the fatigue blouse. So we are going to fold this guy up for the time being. Don't really need to mess with it any. And we'll just set it off to the side. So with this piece, there's two of them, as I said. They're already kind of matched together, and you're going to be sewing the back seam together. So we're going to actually be forming half of the body right here with this two pieces. You're going to want the longest side, and the longest side is also the straightest side, so it'll be pretty easy to spot. It's just one very, very long straight seam. And we're going to be using a 3/8 inch seam, and we're going to be stitching this with a tight back stitch. You're going to want as tight a stitching as you can get on this one, because this back seam is where, you know, you bend over, you have your gear on, you know, you are bending over to pick something up. This seam is going to have a lot of stress put on it. So you want to make sure that this seam is pulled extremely tight. I know I don't really show much of the sewing in these videos. It takes a fair amount of time for the sewing. I'm pretty sure you really don't want to be watching me just stitch by stitch by stitch this entire coat. It would just be extremely boring. So that's why I keep doing the pauses and then coming back and everything's completed. As long as you know the stitches that you're doing, and I can even do a stitch video. I've tried my best to show how you do the stitches that are used for the coat, but I can, down in the comments below, if you'd like to see me do a stitching video on the back stitch, the running stitch, buttonhole stitches, I can do. I'm not the best at, but they're passable. The overcast stitch, I'd be happy to do that. Just if I get an overwhelming amount of comments to do it down in the comment section, I'll be more than happy to do so. Anyways, so I'm going to get this all marked up. Obviously, 3/8 inch seam with a very long chalk line. You're going to pin all the way down. Fairly straightforward. It is a straight seam, so there's nothing really too terribly crazy with it. So I'm going to get this pinned up, chalked up, sewn. So the next time you see it, this will actually be the back portion of the fatigue blouse. All right, and now that we have our back portion of the fatigue blouse done, we're going to move on to the next portion of the body. So obviously, this is the seam, and these sides on either side of the back piece are also going to be seams. So this would be the wrong side and the right side. So what we're going to do next is we're going to take the right side of the back of the coat, fold it to the front. We're going to take one of our front body pieces, and just like everything else that we've been doing with the coat, we're going to line it up edge to edge, nice and evenly, with the wrong sides facing us. And right here, we're going to have a very long seam again for the front of the coat. However, we're also going to be moving on to another portion, which would be the shoulder of the coat. So right here we have this long slanted side of the back portion of the coat on either half. And we are going to take the same long slanted portion at the top of the front of the coat. We're going to match them up as much as we can. The issue with this piece is more rounded than this piece, so it's going to take a little bit of finagling, basically. The way I find that works best is if you pinch, and then as you're pinning, you just pin along and pinch along, and over time that bend actually disappears into the coat. It's just one little tip that I've kind of found that works for myself. I'm sure there's a million different ways to do this for this portion of the construction of the coat. But once both sides of the coat are completely sewn on, it actually starts to look like a serious fatigue blouse. However, there's no sleeves attached or anything, so it's more of a fatigue vest, would be my guess. But I'm going to get this pinned up and marked up real fast, and we'll be back with you in just a second. All right, and there we have it. It is completely pinned together all the way up the side seam of the coat, as well as the shoulder seam. As you can tell, there's a little bit of this kind of waviness. The way that I find best to fix it while sewing it, the pinning method that I showed you just works for pinning it. However, for sewing it, it's fairly easy. You just pull the coat tight, and as you sew along, you just keep one hand always applying pressure. That seems to work best for getting this really tight kind of a seam. I'm not sure if it really affects the construction any. I've never really had any problems with it, as far as I could tell. But I'm going to get this other side of the coat pinned and stitched together. We are using a 3/8 inch of a seam with a very strong back stitch, both along the side seam and the shoulder seam of the coat. Obviously, you're going to be going through, a lot of stress points on these seams, just like the back seam here. So you really want to make sure that those seams are tight, that they give a little bit, but not to the amount where the seams start opening up, but you also don't want it to be really loose either. Otherwise, the coat's just simply going to fall apart. So you kind of have to find that happy medium. Ideally, I want to say it's 6 to 8 stitches per inch if you really want to be counting stitches as you work along. So once I get everything all pinned together on the other side and both sides sewn, let's take a look at what the coat looks like, and I'll be back here in just 1 second. All right, and here we have the complete finished body of the coat with your center seam, your 2 side seams, and the 2 top shoulder seams right here and here. Obviously, this is going to be the inside of the coat, which the lining will be covering. However, once turned to the front, we have where the collar is going to go, which we'll be covering here in just a second. And we have the bottom half of the coat, which is rounded. All of this will have a few more steps to make it look a lot more finished. However, so far this coat is coming along quite nicely. Altogether, it was about 2 hours worth of sewing. Fortunately, I had to work, so this is more of a burning the late night oil sort of job right now. However, I'm quite happy with how it's turning out. The next step that we're going to be doing is actually marking where the collar is going to go. As the instructions state for the coat, it is going to rest along here. However, we're not going to be sewing the collar on the wrong side of the coat. We'll actually be sewing it onto the right side. And we'll be doing that using the helps if I get this all lined up properly. We'll be using the, of course I'm all sorts of turned around. We'll be using the undercollar as the guide for the coat. We're going to be lining this up by the middle seam, and we're going to use a 3/8 inch seam along this portion of the coat. And as you pin along, the corners of the collar should be roughly 2 to 3 inches from the points right here. So in doing so, you'll have this set up perfectly to where the collar isn't too far to one side, fits just right, and ultimately the coat really starts to form once the collar is on. It's phenomenal how the coat really takes a life of its own once the collar is on. So I'm going to get this pinned up and marked real quick, and we'll be right back. Okay, and here we have the collar pinned and marked with a 3/8 inch seam to the wrong side, or as you were, to the right side, the wrong side showing that has all the pins underneath. And that way, when the collar is folded over, you have the right side of the collar actually facing you the way it should be, and you'll actually have a very smart looking coat once it is all sewn together. So we're going to use a very tight back stitch on the collar. Again, just one of those things, it's a stress point. You'll be carrying your coat by the collar, you'll be getting pulled back into line by your collar, so you're really going to want to make sure that your collar is fairly well made. Again, these are an equal distance from the edge, that way it's not looking too lopsided either way you look at it. Again, it's just one of those things, it's personal preference. If you really want an even collar, if you're sewing this for yourself, just one of those things, do you really want to take pride in your work, or do you want to show kind of how not all uniforms were sewn equally during the Civil War? So I'm going to get this sewn up, and we will show you the full detail of the coat here in just 1 second. All right, and here we have our coat collar completely assembled to the coat. So it is a 3/4 inch seam sewn directly to the body. I already did press this. Unfortunately, when I hit record, I apparently didn't hit it hard enough to show that this seam where the coat collar and the body meet actually need to be pressed upwards up into the collar. One thing, it's not really a huge issue that I've noticed, but it's just one of those things that might happen, is the ends of the collar are supposed to come to 2 to 3 inches from the very corner. However, this is roughly an inch. So, the collar could have been cut a little larger, or a multitude of things. Even if you sew the directions exactly how it should be, sometimes things just don't go fully as planned. The next step that we're going to be focusing on, though, since the collar is done, is the facings. Again, I already hit record. Unfortunately, this did not play through, but you're going to have 2 of these very long pieces, and they're exactly the same. And you're going to want a left and right side. You're going to want to press each of these over to 1/4 inch. That's where these are chalk marked at. It's just so a reference for when I iron or press them. And these are going to be on the inside of your coat, where your buttonholes or your buttons are sewn into. They add some strength to your buttons and the buttonholes, plus they give a more finished look to the coat, along with giving you a place to attach your lining to. So in doing this, you're going to want to make sure that you have a left and right side, as I said, because obviously you're going to have a left and right facing for your coat. It's really, really important that you make sure you remember which one is which. If you need to mark it, by all means, mark exactly where or which side these need to go on. It would probably save you a lot of headache to really make sure that you get all that done. You're also going to have the 2 interfacings, which are far shorter, just because it's going to only matter really for a small portion of the coat, and they rest inside the facing just like that. So where this folds over, where this chalk mark is, it is going to simply kind of just nestle it in just like that. Granted, I'm definitely over 1/4 inch, but essentially it should be right up on line with everything. And again, it just gives it a really nice finished look, especially with this interfacing. It just adds some more structure to the facing of the coat. So I'm going to get these pressed and pinned in place to show you what it should look like. When I was first constructing my first fatigue blouse, and I think the second one, in fact, for Corporal Hardway, with that fatigue blouse. Definitely gave me a few fits of scratching my head. Kind of spent 2 days reading over the instructions, even calling Dan Wambaugh to kind of decipher exactly what the instructions meant. And in the end, I just wasn't thinking clearly. I really have no excuse. I was just kind of being dumb because it is fairly straightforward. So I'm going to get these pressed and pinned into place on the coat, and we'll be right back. All right, and here we have the facing of the coat all pinned and marked. We're going to be using a 1/4 inch seam with a tight back stitch. Now, as I described about setting all this up beforehand, this part definitely gave me a few head scratching and hair pulling out moments when I first did my first couple of coats. Mainly just because I didn't understand the terminology at the time and couldn't really visualize exactly how it should have looked, even through the pictures that are supplied through the kit, which are shown right here. To me, it just really threw me for a loop. It was just one of those things that was just a little difficult, I guess, is the best way to put it. So now that it's now being done on video, I hope this helps those who are starting on their first blouse kit and are kind of dipping their feet into sewing possibly for the first time, full garments pretty much. So we have our facing and we have the side that is pressed. You're going to want to make sure that the pressed side is, when it is rolled over, fits along this side, because you're actually going to be sewing and holding this down through this little edge. So obviously you're going to want that material that kind of has some bite to it, so the thread doesn't pop out and you're left with just this huge floppy piece, essentially. So you have your right sides together, the right side of the facing to the right side of the coat. Again, right side meaning the outside. Now, you're going to want your inner facing on the back side, the wrong side. It is very key this stays relatively in place and that these are very well pressed. So once all this is pinned, you're going to sew a very nice back stitch. And another key point to mention when you start stitching is to make sure that you start your stitch right where your collar begins. This is going to be a very short piece of the coat, just because the 2 to 3 inches from the edge of the collar, this is about an inch. So it'll just be a little bit short, but that's definitely where you want to start your stitch and then run all the way down to the curve. I do find, just like our cuff facing, to clip this up just a little bit to help it fold a little better. And even right here wouldn't be too bad. In fact, in the instructions, it's actually listed to clip this little corner portion right here just to help it fold over. So once all that is done, you fold it over, it's sewn in place. It should look something like this. I did kind of do the Martha Stewart route, so to speak, and went and already sewn this portion on to show what it looks like. Obviously, our corner right here is clipped. We have our stitching starting right where the collar begins, goes all the way down, and the inner facing only runs about 75% of the way down, I would say, all the way down to here. In fact, I have yet to clip this. I got a little excited and decided to start recording before I could fully finish it. Granted, I did actually start this late last night and decided it's time to go to bed and go to work, come back at it as soon as I got off work, which obviously is right now. So with all this clipped down, this is clipped and sewn in place. Also helps if I actually pull this up properly. All you're going to do is take your interfacing. I usually just like to start with the top and work my way down. Again, I use my thumb and just kind of push. And and work your way all the way down. You'll have this seam line. What I like to do after getting all this done is to press it just so it's lays all nice and flat. There's no kind of offset, so the seams start sticking up like this. So you have this huge kind of I call it the fat lip, just because you get a lip that's a little more full than the top. So I always like to pinch it down and then just press all along the seam. Another key point to mention is your interfacing is going to be about the same width as this. So what I prefer to do at times is when it's completely folded over, let's see if I can actually get this done properly. And this definitely does help when everything is pressed in place. You can see that this portion that we already pressed on the facing doesn't really go over this, so I like to just tuck that interfacing in. You basically have to do it down the entire length of the interfacing, and then it just gives you a little more of a neat appearance. And it's again, the interfacing gives you a little more tooth to sew through when sewing to the coat body. So I'm going to get this all pressed up, get the other side sewn, get that pressed, and we will be right back in just a moment. Alright, and now that we have our facing sewn, unfortunately this portion of the video was actually already filmed on the other side. However, I must have missed the fact that I forgot to press play. So everything is already pinned and put in place on this side. Luckily, I didn't do the whole thing. So once this is pressed, you're going to want to pin your facing to the body of the coat on the inside, the wrong side. Now, with this part, I've always had some difficulty. I usually get some sort of bunching where the coat ends up doing this, mainly because I'm sewing from the bottom side, so down here to the collar. However, I find if I sew from the collar down to the bottom of the coat, there's no issue. There's no bunching up, no kind of puckering, I guess is the best way to put it, because it will show on this side. This is the front of the coat, so this will be the side, and you'll see all these little ridges, creases, things like that, which luckily so far there's none of that. To put this in place though, we're actually going to want to do an overcast stitch, which is a new stitch that we're going to be doing on this coat. And to do it, you kind of see already how it looks. Fortunately, the wax is kind of in the way and creating a little bit of a mess, but a overcast stitch, you basically do one of these. So the thread comes straight down, and you're going to want to take a sizable bite of material, about that big. So, less than 1/8 of an inch, far less than that. And you're going to want to come in diagonally, preferably as close to your other stitch, but without, hopefully this kind of shows up, so you see where the edge of the coat is right here on my fingertip. So about that far in, and you just want to push. Pull tight. Then you'll notice that the thread is completely straight. And we are going to continue doing that all the way down the body of the coat. So we have a little too much, plus doing this through a camera is a little difficult. It's different than seeing it in person. So again, diagonally through, pull all the way, and there you go. That is the overcast stitch for the facing of the coat on the inside. And just one more time for good measure. Again, diagonal, about 45 degree, and pull through and tight. If it does go through and show on the other side, kind of like what it's doing all along here, that actually isn't too big of a deal. The thread will eventually fade over time. However, it does happen with the stitch. You have to go through the material. You can't take, just a little bit like that. You can still see the needle through, and over time, I mean, I'm pulling on it right now, and you can actually get basically a tear out of the coat. So I'm going to continue overcast stitching all the way down this coat, or this side of the coat, I should say. However, I do have one side already done. Again, this was the side. Okay, so just realized since I did this next step and did a whole spiel about it that my button was a little less sensitive than normal and actually did not register me clicking it to continue the video. So, unfortunately, this whole side is sewn. However, I do have the other half. So this is the interfacing, well, the inside of the facing of the coat. This was overcast stitch, which, if you can see right here, is a series of stitches that run parallel down the coat. However, they're actually not terribly stitched parallel. There is a way, I will be showing that here in just a second, of how this is stitched. Of course, it's always best to have this pinned in place while you are sewing. And you will notice too that there are some threads actually showing through from when I stitched. Don't worry, that's completely fine when you're sewing your coat. That's actually how it's supposed to turn out. And oddly enough, with the lighting right now, I'm noticing this coat actually looks gray instead of the blue. Rest assured, I haven't changed the materials. This is still all the same coat. It's just one of that fact of natural versus synthetic light. I'm just using LED bulbs up in my overhead light right now for this. So, this is all pinned. It doesn't have that fat lip that I was talking about, except for maybe a little bit here, but that's actually not too bad. When you do sew this, you want to start from the top with the collar all the way down to the bottom. Otherwise, you will kind of get some little waviness right here, some of this little puckering, which doesn't show too bad. It can be a lot worse. The first few coats that I've sewn, I always did it from the bottom to the top, and it just turned out not so great. I had to rip the stitching out pretty much all the way down and start from the beginning again. It was oh so wonderful. Okay, so now that we have here the side that's in progress, and helps if I get it all in view. So we have our needle, we have our thread, and all of our pins in place, and we're starting from the collar down. Yes, this is all messy. This is just unmelted beeswax from the thread. So, I'm sure some of you are wondering, Captain Whitehall, what is an overcast stitch and how do I do it? Well, you're in luck. I'm doing at least a little bit of each kind of stitch needed to do this coat. So, to do an overcast stitch, and please bear with me, this is doing this through the lens of a camera pretty much. So, a overcast stitch, you're going to take a little chunk of material right there, go at a 45-degree angle outward, kind of getting close to the other stitch as possible. And as you can see, that is about how far you want it from this little rolled over edge that we pressed of the coat. And we are going to simply push through and pull. And just like that. So yes, the stitch does run parallel, however, you're technically, I mean, you are, but you're not stitching parallel with the coat, because you are going off at this 45-degree angle. It's just the way you start the angle at through the material makes it parallel. And we're just going to pulse through. And we are going to pull or push. Let's get a little more material. right through here, push and pull. So I'm going to speed through this a little bit, get this done, and we'll move on to the next portion of the coat. Again, I'm sorry if this can be a little frustrating. I know by now the video is right around 45 minutes long, and this is just the instruction in the how-to. If I really wanted to bore all of you watching this, I would do it stitch by stitch. Right now, we are approximately, at least for me, doing the video and recording at the same time while doing this. I believe stitching-wise, we are 8 hours in, so unless you want to watch a 8-hour video of someone sewing sleeve, the 2 sleeves and the body of the coat, stitch by stitch, sure, why not? I don't think I have enough memory on my camera to do that, but if you really want it done and there's enough drive for it, I might be crazy enough to try it. Just one of those things that I'm trying to at least show how the coat is made, not literally stitch by stitch, but more the steps and the processes. So if you've gone so far with this, thank you for bearing with me. This video is probably going to be about an hour long, so but I hope that this video does help. So anyways, I'm gonna continue sewing this up and we will be right back. Okay, and now that our facings are all sewn down nice and neat, pressed, no puckering whatsoever, which is a great look. You'll notice you'll actually get the outline of your facing on the outside, which is kind of cool. Plus it helps when you're putting in your buttons and buttonholes later on in the project of sewing one of these. Our next step is going to be, as I have pages flying all over the place, step 22. We're going to double roll and hem the bottom of the coat with a 1/4 inch seam or 1/4 inch hem. Basically fold an eighth and then fold another eighth, and we'll have right around the same. We're basically going to have, so if the coat is facing this way, this overhang will be flush right here with the rounded section of the coat. So kind of like that. And we're going to be using an overcast stitch, roughly 5 to 7 stitches per inch. What I find that helps with doing this, and it even says in the directions too, is to double roll. So there's our double roll, kind of for more for instructional purposes only. And of course it comes loose. But this is why you press it into place. Okay, there we go. So once you get your double roll and you press it to hold it in place, okay, well, it's not wanting to cooperate, but going to basically overcast stitch the entire bottom of the coat to the other side. That way, this whole bottom, what is called a raw edge, because it is not hemmed or secured in any way, so it is left raw, is neatened up. It takes in this little overhang of the bottom of the coat, makes everything look nice, and that's actually the finished part of the body, so to speak, or more or less the shell. We do have other parts of the coat to finish, however. So I'm going to get this all double rolled, marked, pinned in place, and we'll begin sewing. And next time you will see this coat, it will actually be a finished shell or body of the coat, minus the lining, the sleeves, and buttons, everything like that. So anyways, I'm going to get to going on this, and we'll be right back. Alright, and here we have the complete fatigue blouse shell, as I like to call it. I kind of jokingly call this portion of the project the fatigue vest, mainly just because there is a body with no sleeves and a collar. So essentially it's kind of a big vest. So all of our hand stitching is done on the facings, the body, the collar, and of course the inside. The last step that we were doing was hemming up the bottom of the coat to reduce that raw edge. And once you are done sewing it, it's always best to press it so it's nice and flat. So we have a very nice flat pressed hem right here at the bottom of the coat. It is all nice and flush with our two corners. And I went over all the main seams again just to make sure that those lay quite flat so that there's no issue once the lining is being put into the coat. Essentially, this is what I like to call the finished portion of the body, mainly just because you get the full body of the coat sewn up. From here, you can attach sleeves, you can sew on a pocket, and call it good. However, this is a lined Schuylkill fatigue blouse, so we're actually going to be doing lining in the next video. So if you like this video, please give it a like. If you want to catch up and make sure that you're staying up to date on the further construction of this coat, please subscribe. And if you have any comments, questions, or anything like that, please feel free to comment down below in the comment section. And at our website at secondusss.com, we do actually have a write-up on period correct fatigue blouses versus your kind of run-of-the-mill mainstream Sutler row fatigue blouses, and a Wambaugh White & Company kit is actually featured in that to show the comparisons. So that is it for now for constructing the body of the coat, and we'll see the next video where we will actually start doing the lining and finishing of the coat body. Thank you.